right? There is a lot of uniqueness in indie cinema, right? Like the fact that you can take these very specific, very like focused looks that may actually like alienate, super universal audiences, right? I was hoping everyone could go around the room and kind of shout out the one thing that would help indie cinema the most. If like, whether that's media attention or that's people just going out and seeing these films, what is it that like you as a creator really wished people would do for you to help you out? Money, yeah, I love it.
Throw it at us.
Where would you want that money to come from? Like, ideally, right? Like, obviously, as a viewer, I'm happy to pay to watch your film, right? But what would help you out more? Is that like, money from like Hollywood, Bollywood, whatever that might be, or is that money from like institutions, investors? What's the most helpful?
No, that's a really good point, and I don't know the answer to that. I was like half being facetious, but no, I think it's a really good point, because one of the things that frees us up to do stories that are different is there isn't a lot of money hanging on it, and so we don't have to conform to the formula. We don't have to meet any numbers, and yeah, we get a lot more freedom with that. So I don't know. It's a curse and a blessing, right?
Yeah, I think like, right, I think a lot of it comes from like, right, what value we're placing, I guess what value we're placing as an audience when we go and watch something. I just feel like there's such a huge disconnect right now between like people sitting on their high horse or sitting on a stage at a panel or something at a festival and being like, I'm being like, we need more diversity, we need more people of color, like, and then something gets pitched to them and it's exactly what they're looking, it's exactly what they said, but then they're like, oh, but we got to pass because it doesn't fit. And you're just like, wait, what is, and I think, right, I think maybe a way to possibly bridge kind of that gap is by taking a look at what value there is besides commercial value and thinking about like, okay, like, yeah, what good, like, look at how much good it would do, like, for society and as people, for us to not like for us to go see things that we see ourselves in, or that we know that more people need to see themselves in, like, and I think like there sort of has to be an extra step in thinking that goes in that. It can't just kind of be, and this is on the part of probably audiences and executives, but like, it can't just be that instinctual, like, oh, yes or no, because this is what I'm expecting to see, or because this is what's going to make money. Like, you kind of have to go that extra mile and think like, okay, maybe right now this isn't like monetarily a no-brainer, but like in the long run, it is like, it's going to pave the way for more things like this. And as we move forward, then more people are going to see it and this will become bigger. And, it's like, I don't know. I think the more emphasis we place on like, how is this movie going to be beneficial to us as opposed to how much money it's going to make, which is obviously easier said than done. But I think maybe the more value we place on that, the more we'll see indie start to affect commercial, like, and they'll kind of blend together more, hopefully.
Yeah, almost measuring a film by its impact, right? Its emotional impact and like social impact more than like box office numbers. The number of people you're bringing to tears, number of like families you're connecting. You make that a metric, and now someone can track that and say like, I want to take a risk because I think this is what I'm going to get out of it. Would that be something that kind of falls in line with what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's exactly. People love numbers, so if you can somehow make it a stat, I love sports, and as soon as you make something a statistic, suddenly people are like, oh, that makes sense now. So I think that's exactly right. Yeah, it's definitely, because if it's put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to talk a big game about making the world a better place, like through media or through cinema, like, then you have to take risks that maybe don't monetarily make sense now or even in the near future, but that pays off later, and then.
Yeah. And I think, if I can jump in, sorry, I think on top of that, it's like, there are still movies that are being released theatrically that, well, not any recently, but like, if you look at last year, like Uncut Gems made $50 million. And like, that was not a no-brainer. That was not something in today's standards that was a no-brainer. I'm biased because personally that was my favorite movie of last year. I like absolutely loved it, but I also think that like something like Marriage Story, which was probably my number 2 of last year, or maybe 3 after Parasite, like I wish that got a more traditional theatrical release. My biggest thing is the theatrical model. Like, please, dear God, do not go away. Like, there is something really, really, for me personally, very sad about like thinking that a movie like Little Miss Sunshine would probably go directly to streaming today. Like, that, to me, that's like bizarre. I can't imagine that just going directly to streaming. I remember seeing that in theaters and I loved it. And I think that another thing is that people need to realize that like there are still audiences that are hungry for original content. Knives Out was another big hit. It's not all about Marvel stuff. And The Farewell made $17 million. That was the biggest platform release of last year, if I'm not mistaken. And like, I loved seeing that movie in theaters. Like, I think that the theatrical model is something that where it feels like a movie. And if you just watch it strictly at home, for me personally, like, unless it's already on DVD and it's been out for a while and I missed it in theaters, it doesn't quite feel the same. It can get lost in the shuffle pretty easily. And I think that, to go off of what Kahlil said, I just think, even more risks need to be taken. I think like people need to realize like, hey, if something's good, it will find an audience, hopefully. I mean, and also at the end of the day, the last thing I'll say is that film's been around for a little, I think probably like around 100 years or something. Still, no one knew what they were doing then. Nobody knows what they're doing now. Like, that hasn't changed. Like, people, there are maybe a little bit more of like, oh, okay, that's, that's something that feels good. But like, I still think that people don't quite know what they're doing. So just take a shot. Like, at the end of the day, nothing's a sure thing anymore. So even take some more risks. Like, why not? That's probably a very happy-go-lucky, like, outlook to it. And, if I was a studio head, I'd get fired after 13 minutes. But I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also an interesting aspect to theatrical releases that kind of gives each movie its chance in the limelight, right? Mm-hmm. Like, right now, your only way on a streaming platform, like let's say Netflix, is, you cracked like the new releases list, maybe that's like the best like parallel, but it's not quite the same to walk past, like grab an ice cream cone or something and see what's actually playing in your theater.
I think what could really help is to have a platform. Just kind of bouncing off of what Kahlil was talking about. I'm a diaspora filmmaker, and even if I wasn't a filmmaker, even in my own identity, people always say that I'm not Indian enough, I'm not American enough, I'm not this enough. So even that then translates into myself as a filmmaker and the films that I'm trying to tell. And unfortunately, it's something it's a problem, even in the South Asian American film festivals or the Indian American film festivals. Diaspora content is it's at a very low percentage in showing compared to all the other films. And don't get me wrong, I want to see films that are coming out of India. There should be this like global cross conversation of like where indie films and cinema is going, but we also exist, right? And I think if diaspora filmmakers don't have a platform to speak, there's so many hidden gems out there that we don't even know that exist because they haven't had the opportunity to screen or whatnot. So I think that's really important. And I think beyond that, the actual industry itself, it's already set up for somebody to succeed. Unfortunately, it's not set up for a person of color to succeed at the moment. When we look at box office numbers or whatnot, people still compare what you're trying to make to numbers of a film that, had a primarily Caucasian cast. So this whole sellability factor, it just doesn't equate yet. So there's not an actual business model that has become equal to people of color at the moment. So I think everything's set up. And I think, again, what Kahlil was saying, a lot of people are a lot of talk about, yeah, these are my shiny brown people. And like, Look at all these cool, diverse films and stories they're making. Look how authentic this is. And the truth is, beyond that, you have to create a culture that sustains those voices, right? We exist. We've existed for a very long time. I feel like South Asian content in America was coming to a certain place, probably in the late 90s. You know, we were getting somewhere. You know, there were like wonderful films like Chutney Popcorn and American Desi and all these really interesting films that were exploring like the Indian American or South Asian American identity. And then 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, that changed almost everything for somebody who was brown. You know, we were no longer, it was almost like dehumanizing in terms of like our characters and our stereotypes or whatever. We were now just terrorists and that's it, right? So for example, if you're a person that's dealing with that here, in the Indian context, we're also not Indian enough. So yeah, I think the biggest thing is having a platform and supporting diaspora voices, supporting marginalized voices. You know, all these stories exist out there. There are people that have been making films, short films forever. It's just what happens after they make a short film, you know? You know, short films are made so you can connect with people, you can showcase them at a film festival or whatnot. But even if at film festivals, if it's not equal, if you're not listening to your community and the actual voices that are in your community, there's a problem. So I think, yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
No, if I could actually just jump off something, just because I agree with everything you said a lot, and I think especially what you said about like, you know, it's almost like the more mixed you are as a person, the harder you are to market, right? Because then you can't just be like Netflix India, or you can't just be like an American movie, because you're sort of both, and it doesn't make sense for people, you know. And so like, yeah, and I think that's like so poignant also to point out is like, yeah, it's, you know, I think people have to get more used to the fact that like, you know, it's 2020 now, and as we keep going into the future, like the country is only going to be more and more filled with like people like us, of who came from somewhere else, or who are a mix of multiple different things, or, you know. And it's like, it's not just as simple as being like, as showing, you know, like let's show, you know, Arjun's, like you said, it's like, let's show this sort of formulaic thing, and we know immediately that's going to be like 50 mil people come in. Like, you know, there definitely has to be more of a, yeah, there has to be more of an understanding that will change over time, but you have to be moving towards that change. You can't just be like, well, we have to wait till the numbers reflect that, because if you keep putting out the content that keeps serving the same people that keep seeing all of those films, then it's not like, then of course it's not going to flip, because yeah, it's like you have to kind of put the foot down first.
Right. And I think we're changing in that direction, where before a lot of people became submissive to the system and would create narratives or reduce their cultural backgrounds or whatnot to become marketable or sellable. But I think the flip side of it's happening now, and we're very fresh. Like we're at the beginning of this right now. And I'd like to bring Farewell, that example again. You know, this film was in like probably 80-70% in a whole other language, but it resonated with so many people because it was so specific, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're heading in the right direction. It's just we need support from all angles, just the audience, the actual industry. If you're trying to find new voices, don't just put us in a nice, shiny diversity lab or whatever. Give us mentorship, you know, give us opportunities to shadow. You have to sustain our voices in order for us to continue moving forward. We can only make short films to a certain extent. And for example, if we're diaspora filmmakers, our short films will only go to a certain extent because, we're not this or we're not that. But yeah, just support.
Yeah, I think the other thing is to not have a mentality of like there can only be one. Like that the next step has to be like there's so many different experiences within every community, like no two are the same. And what Kahlil was saying about like mixed backgrounds, like I'm literally mixed. Like my story is never going to be one or the other thing. It's never going to kind of have like, if people are looking for a ready-made audience for a particular kind of story, it's not ever going to fit one or the other category. And I think there's this tendency, in the industry at the moment to say, okay, we have like our one person from this community and we're good. Like that's been filled, that's been taken care of. Happens in writers' rooms on television all the time. Even now, we'll have like a ton of diversity labs, and then, one person gets into a writer's room and it fills that quota and stays in that quota and doesn't move out of there. So I think ending that mentality of there can only be one, and also letting people fail up or stay, like even if they have a crappy first feature or something about it wasn't quite working, but they've done other work that's good, let them stay, even if, because I mean, that's happened to a lot of young male directors, usually white. And, I love seeing that Chloe Zhao has gone from the writer to directing a Marvel movie. Whether or not a Marvel movie is your thing, that's awesome that she's getting channeled, she's getting funneled that same way because she's talented and she deserves it. So more of that would be awesome too.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up the second chances idea, right? Right. And it's also really interesting to what Nirav was saying, which is like diaspora is this interesting point where it's the intersection of two cultures, right? And so rather than like, it's so weird that our mentality there is like, I want to categorize this into one, and it doesn't fit into either, so it's neither. Instead, it makes so much more sense that it should be both, right? Like it has elements of both. And I think this is something that all of your films do really well. There's also something that's like super important to us at Escapist, right? The whole goal is that get someone who normally wouldn't relate to something or doesn't think they would, and make them realize they actually do, right? And I think, I could try and say something nice, but I think like Bong Joon-ho says it best, right? Which is once you can get over that 2-inch wall of subtitles, like the whole world will be open for you.